The Doorman episode is one of the best in season 6, in my opinion. I give it credit. It's not one of my favorites, like one of my personal favorites, but I think personally it's one of the best episodes. One that was quite cool because Jerry Seinfeld's real life best friend Larry Miller appeared in this episode as the Doorman, and he definitely felt the good chemistry between the two of them. And you can tell they knew each other very well, and that they definitely they basically knew how to work the other one basically, and it was very it felt believable and tense with this mind game playing Doorman, and then Jerry, who's just gullible enough the way it is. And of course we have the debate where if it's the bro or the man-zer, and the awkward but funny scene where Kramer's like half dancing behind Frank Costanza. And of course that ending scene that Jason Alexander just could not get through. That was like kind of like an improv, like last minute change to it. And then of course the line that Sid Farkas said when George interviewed to be a bra salesman at where Farkas works at, and he says that line again that literally just sums up the series, which is barring any unforeseen incident. But we'll get to all of that. Let's talk the Doorman. So the episode starts with Jerry going to pick up Elaine, who was house sitting at Mr. Pitt's while Mr. Pitt was away. He walks in and the Doorman stops him, and he says he's here to pick up Elaine Bennett. He goes, and with this like awkward smile, he's like, Venice. Nobody heard that name. He goes, how she's house sitting for Mr. Pitt, and he goes, oh, are you the boyfriend? Here for a quickie? Like, obviously making Jerry feel very uncomfortable, but it was hilarious. Which also, funny enough, this episode was the first time I ever heard about the phrase quickie. So now I know what a quickie is, of course. But anyways, while Jerry's awkwardly waiting for the elevator, he just randomly blurts out to the door, how about them Knicks? And he goes, oh, you see me reading the sports page. Basically, he's saying how, oh, you think that you're better than me, or think I'm just some, lame old doorman and whatnot. Which, again, just makes Jerry uncomfortable, because this guy's basically, like messing with his mind. So, Jerry goes upstairs to Elaine's, and to Mr. Pitt's, and he wants to wait, because Elaine tells him that Doorman gets off at 6 before the night turn Doorman comes in. And Jerry does not want to see the guy at all. So they decide to wait. Meanwhile, Kramer and George are hanging out. They're walking down New York Street. And Kramer sees this bus of German tourists. And Kramer thought for the fun of it, it'd be funny just to pull a prank and make them think that they're witnessing like a robbery. So Kramer acts out that he's robbing George, which George just plays along pretty good. They return back, of course, later on. They're supposed to go out with Kramer and Frank Costanza, who's been living with George apparently ever since him and Estelle separated. And of course he didn't know at the time, but he was sleeping on the pee-stained couch from back in the couch when Poppy peed on the sofa. Remember that, we're going to come back to that later. But the three of them were supposed to go out. George, Kramer, and Frank. When first off, Frank was ranting about his record player that Kramer had taken. So Kramer said he'd bring it back. But then Frank said before they go out, he wants to get changed. He takes his shirt off, and then Kramer was shocked. George was like he was about to throw up. Why? We'll find out in a second. Meanwhile, back at Mr. Pitt's, when they realized that the doorman was gone, they're getting ready to leave, but then the phone rings. And Elaine should not have answered, but instead Jerry does, and it's like, "Hi, Mr. Pitt," like the classic, like, "Hi, Mr. Pitt," that Jerry had, like the over enthusiastic, but the serious, strict Mr. Pitt was like not finding it funny. But he basically tells Elaine she has to stay and tell him what's all in the mail. She says nothing important, so Elaine couldn't go. So Jerry goes by himself. Of course, when he goes to leave, he likes the new doorman. They're a lot better. But on his way back, he just so happened to walk past the building where the doorman he didn't like lives. And they had like another awkward, exchange or whatnot. So then Jerry keeps going. Next day, Jerry, George, and Kramer were at the at Monk's, and they were talking about how Frank Costanza apparently has breasts, like big breasts apparently for a man, which makes George feel very uncomfortable because he's like, one, what if I get them, and two, where could I could have gotten that gene from? This is where Kramer pitches the idea how men should basically have some sort of support like women do, for heavier chests like that. But of course, George is obsessive, wondering where could I get this from, or could I maybe have like big breasts like my dad? Elaine comes in, and she says apparently the doorman was complaining about him, saying that Jerry followed him home, and of course Jerry was like pissed off about it. And I guess they're going to try to make up seeing the movie that night, but Jerry wanted to wait until the doorman leaves because he didn't want to run into him, because again he didn't like him. He was uncomfortable with him, which I don't blame him. George, meanwhile, is sitting across the table, like looking underneath his shirt, checking out, seeing if he had breasts or whatnot. Which Elaine's like, "What's George doing?" And Jerry goes, "Oh, he's getting something off his chest," which was funny. There was also a woman who walked past him and said, "Hey, look, we're twins." And then George was just talking about saying that George had breasts just like her. And he's like, "Aw, nub." And Elaine goes, "No, I just meant that we're both wearing the same shirt," which they were. There was a scene. Again, this episode was funny. Like all of them were funny, but this one especially gave me a lot of laughs. There was a scene where George was on the subway, and obviously because of the movement and whatnot, the vibrating, he was worried his chest started jiggling. Oh, it was so awkward, but so funny. George with this very disturbed look on his face. And this is where he starts trying to plot a way to have his father move out. So that way George can have his apartment back to himself. And also because he just feels awkward about the fact that his father has breasts. So he's determined to find out what's going on with that. Meanwhile, Jerry goes back to Mr. Pitt's the next day to pick up Elaine, to unfortunately discover that the doorman he didn't like switched with the night term for that night because he had some personal matters to take care of. In which Jerry gets pissed off and finally admits he doesn't want to cause trouble, he just wants to be friends. And the doorman says, "You want to be my friend? Watch the door for me." He says, I'm just going to go right down the street for a minute to grab a beer, he'll be right back. So Jerry waits. And he waited. And he waited. And he waited. And the doorman was not coming back till Elaine came down and said something to him. Only thing Jerry had done was, well, actually, the doorman said it's not rocket science here. It's just don't let people in who don't live here. But then again, how would Jerry know who all lives here and who doesn't? So the only thing Jerry did besides, he had one person who told him if he asked him if he lived there again, he was going to call the police. But he did have FedEx draw off a package that he signed for. Finally, when Elaine came down, he's like, I'm sick of this. He's been gone for long enough. He goes, I'm done. They go to leave to come back later to find out the couch in the lobby was stolen. And they're like, where's the doorman? Which the doorman never came back. So Jerry and Elaine leave and realize, they're stuck, and basically that doorman was going to throw them under the bus. So they came up with a plan trying to figure out what all happened. Get back momentarily. Meanwhile, Kramer went back to George's drop off the record player to Frank Costanza. And then they start talking, and then Kramer introduces him to the bro, he calls, which is like a bra for, boys, which apparently was the costume designer's, one of her jog bras or something like that she used, that they used for that. George was on his way over back to his apartment with his mom, who was going to pick him up and pick Frank up, and they were going to go back home together and try to work things out. Until they show up, and earlier in the episode, Frank said he wanted his record player back so he can listen to the cha-cha. So Kramer's putting the bro on him, and they're listening to cha-cha, and they're kind of like doing a little bit like a jigaboo, like just like dancing, like half dancing a little bit, like do do do. And then as they're putting that bra on, and still dancing, George walks in with Estelle, and Estelle was just like, oh my god. Yeah, Kramer still had this smirk on his face, and he still starts dancing beside Frank, and oh, it was awkward, but it was so funny. I laughed so many times in this episode. I said, I wouldn't rank it as one of my personal favorites, but it was just so good. So then, of course, obviously, that turned Estelle off. She didn't take Frank home. So then, when Elaine came back over to go to Mr. Pitts, the doorman, who was getting, teared into by, the owner of the building or whatnot, can't remember who it was, he sees Elaine and says it was her friend. He lies, says he had to go to the bathroom when it happened, and he has someone to watch the door, which meanwhile he went out to get a beer and was gone for ages, and basically set Jerry up to just play a little more mind games with him. So obviously the doorman got away with that, and then Elaine was told that they had to replace the couch and buy a new couch. And Jerry, of course, was not happy about that. So then they came up with this idea. George said, what if he gets rid of his couch, and they donate that to the building, use that for a couch in the lobby? But Jerry was like, that's the pea-stained couch. And then George was like, I know, because I flipped the cushion over because my dad sleeps on it all the time and doesn't even know that it's there. So they're like, okay, let's go with it. So and the idea was, if George got rid of that couch, his dad would have to move out and move back in with his mom. Kramer and Frank, though, thought they'd try to go into business and pitched the idea of the bro to his friend Sid Farkas, same guy who George had interviewed with as a bra salesman, I think back in season 5 sometime. But of course, Frank said he had to do something about the bro. The name. He doesn't like the name bro. He pitches the Manzier, which they're just arguing back and forth. Apparently between Larry David and the writers that were writing this episode, they couldn't decide what name to call it, so they actually put that argument in the actual episode. They go to see Farkas, and they struck a deal, basically. But then, again, Farkas said, I think things should go well, barring any unforeseen business. And this time, he started that unforeseen business. He told Frank he was sorry about to hear about him and Estelle separating. And he says he's always been fond of Estelle. He want to know if he could ask her out. Which Frank flipped out on them and basically said he ain't doing business with him. So that happens, and then when Estelle comes over to try to pick him up, first off, Frank had just found out that he was sleeping on a pea-stained couch, because Kramer blabbed. Getting back to last episode where they wanted to set up Kramer to be able to tell Wendy she has a bad hairstyle. This is Kramer inadvertently saying, by the way, that was a pea-stained couch, and Frank was not happy about it. But then whenever Estelle came over, and he said, we can go out to dinner tonight and try to talk things out. She goes, I can't, I have plans. She's going out with Sid Farkas. And then Frank refused to go home. But he's like, well, where are we going to sleep? Because I got rid of the couch already. And then Frank goes, we'll work something out. Meanwhile, the couch was delivered to Mr. Pitt's building, in which, they were accepting of the couch. And I think Elaine went to the bathroom or something, I can't remember. But just as it's all settled, who happened to come walking off the elevator? not the Doorman, which Jerry had some weird imagination that he was sitting around with his other Doorman buddies. He was just bragging about how he set Jerry up to play the mind games with him to mess with his head, which of course, probably didn't happen, but, it wouldn't surprise me if it did happen. But of course, who happens to walk off the elevator while Jerry waits for Elaine? Poppy! Poppy, the same guy who was a little sloppy and didn't wash his hands, and the same guy who peed on Jerry's couch because of his issues with his intestines or whatnot. He comes down. I guess he was in the building visiting a friend, and then he asked Poppy how his condition was. He says he's doing a lot better, and he says he can't get aggravated really easily. It says his condition got aggravated whenever your friend brought up that thing about abortion at my restaurant. And then Poppy then sees Elaine and goes, wait, that's her? And then Elaine's like, oh no, realize obviously what's about to happen. He goes, and he gets aggravated from seeing Elaine because he doesn't like Elaine because of the whole abortion stuff. He goes, oops, but my microphone. He goes, I got to sit down. I'm like, Poppy, no! And of course the credits freeze when Poppy sits down on the couch. So obviously he most likely peed on that couch again. But that time, that's on Poppy. That's not on Jerry and Elaine. He's got to buy a new couch. I'm pretty sure he sat on the same pillow that was flipped over with the pee stain on it. But of course, this time there was not a piece of newspaper covering up the wet spot, the preset wet spot, basically. But then we have the final scene. Obviously, Frank Costanza said they would have to work something out since George got rid of his couch. Which, by the way, also, if I didn't say this before, this was the first episode we got to see George's apartment since he moved into it after getting his job with the Yankees in the opposite. But they basically added this scene in where Frank Costanza is sharing George's bed with him. He gets in bed and he's eating kasha. And he offers some to George, and Jason Alexander just could not get through the scene. He just started busting out laughing every time. Then, of course, George is trying to fall asleep, but then Frank is, turning on his lamp, being all distracting, and George puts his pillow over his face. He's like, whatever. What an episode. This was a good episode, The Doorman. Again, like I said, it's not one of my personal favorites, but I will say it was definitely one of the best episodes. I loved it. Again, between, Larry Miller being just like this, mind game playing doorman. I still like... I forgot something. So earlier in the episode, whenever Kramer pretended to rob George in front of those German tourists, later there was a scene where Kramer was walking down the street with a typewriter, and some dramatic music starts playing as the German tourists recognized him, and one gets out and starts saying, "Stop that man!" It's supposed to be a reenactment from Marathon Man, but he was able to come to peace then because he started basically showing off his bro, the man's ear, basically the bra for men. Forgot to mention that, but yeah, that was a reenactment of Marathon Man. Of scene from there, which Jonathan Wolff scored for that as well. Of course, that argument of that fake robbery thing was a real life experience that happened with Max Pross and Tom Gamble, who used to do the same thing when they lived in New York. And again, Larry Miller, who played the doorman, was Jerry Seinfeld's best friend. He actually auditioned for George years ago, whenever the show first started. Which Jason Alexander thought that he would get the part because he's Jerry's best friend, but George got instead. But I think he played an excellent doorman. I think, and like I said before, the bickering over the name of the male bra was inspired by Larry David and the writers, so they couldn't decide what to name it, the bro or the man's ear. But yeah, that's the Doorman episode, and that's another 6 episodes we got here. We have about 6 episodes left for season 6. The next one, to Jimmy. That one's one of my personal favorites. What will happen? The man will tell you next. Give a little preview there of what Jimmy's made of. Jimmy likes to speak about himself in the third person. Demand doesn't have a habit of that, but, you know, Demand likes making videos. So let's go do it, guys. That's the Doorman. I'll see you guys in the next video, which, again, is going to be the Jimmy. Tell them, guys, what are your thoughts. Make sure your thoughts down in the comment section below. Slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. Follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Tell them, guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night. Peace out, everybody.